Hello everybody, this is Dr. Kevin Connors, and we're going to be doing a series of 3 videos on the cell danger response. The cell danger response. This is a response that takes place in your cells from a cellular level in a protective measure. But sometimes these survival mechanisms of our cells can hurt us, and that's what we're going to discuss in this series. So we have survival mechanisms that take place in the cell when we experience different traumas. Even emotional trauma affects our cells, but mainly physical trauma, biological trauma. So physical trauma would be like damage to like a bruise or an injury. That's a physical trauma. There's a protective measure that takes place in order to prevent more cell death and more cell damage. Biological trauma would be in the classification of an infection of some kind. So when we have a biotoxin, which means a living organism like a pathogen, so a bacterial infection, a Lyme disease infection, or a virus is a biological trauma. And a chemical trauma is an exposure to some sort of chemical, like a heavy metal toxicity or a pesticide toxicity. And these things are taking place all the time. We are bruising ourselves all the time. You're bumping yourself all the time. Biological traumas are extremely common due to just exposure to viruses and exposures to different bacteria. And your body has to respond to these. And chemical traumas are just becoming more and more prevalent. There are more and more chemicals on the market on a daily basis. And these chemicals are affecting, or we should say, our body has to respond to these chemicals in a way that's going to protect our cells. So constant exposure to these chemicals, either via constant exposure, meaning that I'm putting more in my body on a daily basis, or my body's inability to detox these chemicals, so I'm having constant exposure, is causing this cell danger response that is supposed to take place over a matter of minutes, over a matter of days, to be a constant response that's taking place on a cellular basis, and that's where we see problems. So that's really what we're going to be talking about. So this cell danger response that is supposed to be a protective measure for a matter of minutes, a matter of hours, or a matter of days is becoming a chronic cellular condition, and it's changing the way my cells work. And that's what can lead to so much ill health, you could say. This is what leads to cancer. This is what leads to someone having a more chronic condition. The difference between somebody who gets Lyme disease and recovers just fine after taking some antibiotics and 3 months later doesn't even remember the incident, and someone who gets Lyme disease and is suffering 10 years later with that from that same exposure 10 years ago, or someone who is diagnosed with cancer and doesn't know where it came from. Well, we have to look back over time, and you see this person has been in a chronic cell danger response for some time. So understand what a cell danger response is. In the case of an infection, in this example, you have different signaling that takes place in the cell to protect the cell from being damaged by that virus. So a virus or a bacterial infection will eventually can kill the cell, and if you kill enough cells, you damage the tissue, you damage the tissue, you damage the organ, you cause death of the organism. That's us. So our body responds to protect itself. And that is great for that period of time to make those changes that we're going to see as we go through these slides. But when we get stuck in that situation, that's what leads to even greater ill health. So when this persists, the cell danger response persists abnormally, because that's not normal. This is supposed to be a short-term response to a short-term problem. But when we have a long-term irritation, something that's stimulating this cell danger response, then we're going to see the issues. So one of the things that takes place is we see when we look at a person's health picture, like this is one test that we do on all our patients, is we look at the balance between their sympathetic and their parasympathetic nervous system. And when you see the sympathetic in the case of this picture right here at that number 5, it's shown in a different graph at number 4 there, and the raw data is at number 1. But at number 5 there, this is the balance between the sympathetic and this blue bar graph here. The sympathetic is on the left and the parasympathetic is on the right. When we're stuck in a sympathetic response, we are stuck in this that is a sign that we're in the immediate um, cell danger response. We get the sympathetic response of our nervous system in order to protect the cells, in order to protect our body, which is necessary for the time. But when we're stuck in that situation over time, then we see a lot of damage. And eventually what we see on a test like this where we're measuring the balance between sympathetics and parasympathetics, we see both of those sympathetic and parasympathetics both high. Both of those where you see on this, the blue bar graph for sympathetic is in the high range, and the blue bar graph for the parasympathetic is in the low range. Over a long period of time, you'll see both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic at the very high range, and many times my patients are capped out. They're both off the graph. And that is because the chronic inflammation is so great, it's affecting the brain, so my frontal lobe is not able to communicate to the archaeocortex, the midbrain, where the parasympathetics and the sympathetics are housed. So that lack of inhibition, that lack of calming, that lack of regulation to the autonomic nervous system is imbalanced. So understand, take a step back. Your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system are part of your autonomic, think automatic nervous system, that is supposed to control basically your organ function, your cellular function. And it is a neurological control, not a chemical control. So when our nervous system senses any sort of danger, we'll go into a sympathetic response. And a whole bunch of different chemical things take place, different hormonal changes take place in order for us to overcome that stressor or that injury. But when we're living in that, when that becomes a part of us, when we have a chronic biotoxin, when we have a chronic injury, and we even see this with people, this is the exact same response. The cell danger response happens with people that over exercise. You're getting constant damage, constant tissue damage. You might be getting very buff and in shape, but you're damaging your cells at a cellular basis. And I get cancer patients that call me quite often. I can't figure out what's wrong with me. I'm the epitome of shape. I've been teaching yoga classes and health classes for years. I'm in the best condition I've ever been in life. What's wrong with my body? You have to look at this picture. Are you stuck in a cell danger response, and have you been for the last 10 years? And that's what's leading to your current diagnosis. So this is a very important picture. Your cell danger response, again, is supposed to be a temporary response to deal with a stressor in your life. And that once that stressor decreases, then that cell danger response turns off. And when that turns off, our body goes back into homeostasis, goes back into a balance between the autonomics, a balance between the hormonal function, the chemical function that's taking place, and that cell danger response turns off. So we don't want to live there. That causes all sorts of problems. Now we'll see changes from a chemical response as well. So other tests that we want to run are genetic tests. That's super important. We're going to talk a lot about that. And other biological chemical tests that tell us byproducts of how your genes are functioning, and we can see upregulations and downregulations of genes, even if there are not gene defects, that can tell us the response that my body is in due to its current function. So again, an infection, a toxicity, a chronic over-exercising, a chronic injury? Is it going to change the electron balance, change the chemical balance, extracellular, as our body is trying to fight this disease? It changes the way our cells function on the inside. The mitochondria change, and all sorts of different things take place. And this is just one example of what takes place in the mitochondria. It shuts down oxygen, increases redox oxidation in the cells, and your cells don't have the building blocks to continue to function. ATP function decreases, and we end up with reactive oxygen species, and we're going to see what takes place. Especially this is even accelerated if we have specific genetic defects, and these damages can be irreversible, meaning it can cause the cell to start acting like a cancer cell in a rapid replication. This is what can then damage the DNA and send this person into a cancer condition. So it becomes very serious. So at the end of this set of arrows, it says once the danger is eradicated, normalcy is supposed to resume, and the cycle and the circle reverses. But the problem is that when the danger doesn't go away, when we have a chronic subclinical infection. So this is where a lot of you are saying, I don't have any chronic infection. What we're really speaking about is not a chronic infection that most people will recognize. For instance, heart disease. The number one cause of heart disease is peroxynitrite formation. Well, what causes that? Typically a chronic mycotoxin or chronic H. pylori infection that the person never ever knew that they had. And that upregulates nitric oxide production, and you complicate issues with this person having SOD gene defects. They have decreasing ability to get rid of reactive oxygen species. That combines with excess nitric oxide because of a chronic infection, causing a highly ramped up peroxynitrite formation. What's peroxynitrite? It's a very damaging chemical to your endothelial cells. What are they? They're the cells that line your arteries. And when you damage the cells that line your arteries, you're going to have arterial sclerosis. You're going to have all the coronary heart diseases. If it's in your heart, you're going to have plaquing, and cholesterol tries to cover that wound and protect that plaque. And the advertising agencies of the pharmaceuticals have blamed the whole problem on cholesterol, so we'll give you Lipitor to decrease the cholesterol. That doesn't decrease the plaquing. That it may decrease the plaquing, but it doesn't decrease the bulging, the inflammation that's taking place in the endothelial cells, which is really the cause of the coronary heart disease. And coronary heart disease is the number one cause of death in the United States right now. Peroxynitrite affects the endothelial cells greatly. Peroxynitrite also affects the cells themselves, not just the endothelial cells, the cells that line the arteries, but other cells in the body, and increase oxidation species and increase cancer rates. So this is a bad guy here, and we got to deal with this. And these are things that you can deal with, and you can take proactive approaches. And this is why I'm so into having everybody get their 23andMe done and get a genetic test done, because at least you can see, do I have defects on my NOS genes that will ramp up my nitric oxide, so you can have this even without having an infection. And do I have defects on my SOD genes? These are things. These two are very, you can't say repairable, but supportable. You can support those defects and decrease your risk of heart disease and cancer long before you have a diagnosis. So what do? Is this hopeless? Oh my gosh, this is horrible. I got the cell danger response. I'm constantly living in stress. I know this is going on in me. I've had Lyme disease for 10 years and I feel awful, and maybe this is the cause of my sickness, etc. Well, go back to what we do, and I've been preaching on this for 30 years. You have to identify the causes. Do you have genetic defects? Do I have a chronic infection? Do I have, chronic stress in my life? Do I have, go on and on. There's 1,000 different possibilities here. You have to support the pathways. So we have to look at this genetic pathways that are going bad, and what are we going to do about them? Learn more about this. Go to our website, Connor's Clinic. It's right there in the corner. Go to the genetic testing tab. You'll see a bunch of videos similar to this that go over the genetic testing, that tell you how to get a genetic test, and then how to schedule an appointment to go over your genetic test. And it can be extremely revealing. I have never once had a person have me go over their genetic test and go, I wish I didn't spend the money on this. Almost everybody says this is the best money I've ever spent, because it can literally save your life, and it's really not even that expensive. So make sure you do that. And then that gives you the ability to heal and allow yourself time to heal. So I hope this video was helpful. I have at least 2 more on this subject coming up, so make sure you catch those as well. Thank you again. Have a great day.